There's this film that won the Oscars for the Best Animated Feature this year, and I think it's one of the most unique works that won the award in a while. I'm talking about Flow, which was directed by the Latvian filmmaker Gins Silbalodis. There are many things that the movie stands out for. For one, it's definitely impressive how it was created using Blender, a free and open source 3D computer graphics software. Despite that, it easily competed alongside high-budget films from studios like Pixar and DreamWorks, while being made on a much smaller budget of less than $4 million. Viewers are also fascinated by the way this kids movie tells its narrative without any dialogue, relying solely on visual storytelling and authentic animal sounds. There's also the fact that it's a Latvian film, and that sounds pretty cool because when is the last time you've seen a film from Latvia? This is why it also competed for the Oscars on the International Feature category. All of that already makes the movie worth at least giving a try, so if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend you do so. For now, you know that one angle that I'm always interested in exploring is a depiction of nature on screen, and I think this film lends itself perfectly to such an analysis. Its representation of animals, landscapes, and even climate is one of the main reasons why it feels so damn unique, and I will be explaining why in this video. The first thing that will get your attention when watching Flow is that it entirely follows the perspective of animal characters. We don't see a single human being in this movie throughout its entire runtime, unless you want to count this giant drowning statue. Instead, we mostly follow the narrative from the point of view of this black cat, and at some point shift to explore perspectives from other animals, a capybara, a Labrador, a lemur, and secretary birds. In essence, this is not all that new to animation. Very famous films like, I don't know, The Lion King or Kung Fu Panda and many other famous works center animals with no trace of humans as well. But there's something about Flow that makes it feel truly different in how it does that. In order to understand this feeling, I think we should refer to the concept of anthropomorphism. This is a term that describes the attribution of human traits, emotions, or behaviors to non-human entities like animals, objects, or natural phenomena. In the case of Flow, the concept applies to animals, but it's very special in how it goes about doing it. You should know that animation has always heavily relied on anthropomorphism. Many iconic characters that we know from animation classics, especially from Disney, are animals with human characteristics. According to this book on the subject titled Animals, Anthropomorphism, and Mediated Encounters, the phenomenon is so common in Disney that it has become entwined with what is known as disneyfication, a term used to describe the commercial transformation of things or environments into something simplified, controlled, and safe. But the book argues that it's also commonly used to describe how animals are given human characteristics and cultural stereotypes. It also points to concerns that have been raised about the impact of inaccurate animal representations on children, the public understanding of other animals, or even future generations of scientists. These concerns don't only stop at scientific accuracy though, since other scholars in different fields have argued that Disney's anthropomorphism promotes and celebrates humanity's superiority by forcing animals into gendered, racial, ethnic, and class categories, reflecting a deeply human-centric worldview. Following all of these critiques, the book quotes scholars who argue in favor of a particular type of anthropomorphism, one they refer to as biocentric or animal-centric, which can take the animal's point of view, thereby allowing other animals' behavior and emotions to be accessible to us. And I think this is where Flow comes in. While the concept is developed in a scientific context, I think we can apply it on our comparison between the movie and Disney animation. On the one hand, we have an anthropocentric human view that asks the question, how would I feel in this situation, which I believe is reflected in Disney films. And on the other, we have an animal-centric view that asks, what is it like to be an animal? And I think that Flow falls under this second category, since it actually takes the time to be as faithful as possible in its representation of an animal experience. The biggest indication of that is, of course, the complete absence of dialogue and the incorporation of animal sounds and gestures that were inspired by the observation of real-life animals.
We looked at reality, but we interpreted. The animals are behaving like animals, so we looked at references for everything.
This reminds me of another type of anthropomorphism that was brought up in the book, which identifies a critical kind of anthropomorphism, where our statements about animal joy and suffering, hunger and stress, images and friendships are based on careful knowledge of the species. As we saw in the interview with the director, there's a sincere attempt to do just that. Right from the start of the movie, we see the biggest nod to animal centrism through all the statues of cats that get emphasized. There's also a clear attention to the details that represent animals, like sound design. Zilbalores said on this interview on Letterboxd that all the animal voices are real animals. They're not humans mimicking them. When I discovered that different cats sound differently, we mostly had to use one cat. There is no voice actor, so the sound designer is basically like an actor. The level of dedication here is quite impressive. It also applies to the detailed movements that they made sure to faithfully represent. I still have to make one thing clear though. This doesn't mean anthropomorphism is completely absent from the film. Some of its elements do reflect human experiences. For one, it is structured around a narrative that appeals to human viewers with a character arc and some kind of a plot that follows traditional storytelling norms specific to humans. And while there is no dialogue whatsoever, emotional expressions by animals are a little bit exaggerated, so they can resonate with human viewers. We can also say the same about the themes, since the movie aims to reflect some deeply human experiences on things like solidarity and companionship, overcoming fear and trauma, and adaptation to change. Where Flow stands out, though, is in the way it maintains some kind of balance between representing animals on their own terms, but still making sure that their experiences are profoundly relatable to human viewers. I believe that the one piece of media that comes close to Flow for this naturalistic approach to representing animals is the 2022 video game Stray, which has indeed been brought up by audiences in discussions about the movie. Now, this game is very different in terms of genre since it's a cyberpunk adventure game where players need to navigate a dystopian city inhabited by robots and some hostile creatures, but it's similar to Flow in how it centers the perspective of an animal. Players have to navigate the game world entirely through the point of view of a cat, which makes the dynamics quite unique. And similar to Flow, there seems to be some good attention to details when it comes to this kind of representation. The director was even asked about whether he was inspired by the game, and he pointed to the technical influences of the video game medium in general by saying that he also wanted to have this graphic style where it's more abstract, where you don't render every strand of hair. It's more like a hand-drawn image, and that again you see in some indie video games, which allow themselves to be deliberate with detail. This statement reinforces the uniqueness of Flow, since it shows how it also aims to differ in the way it goes about its animal centrism technically, and chooses to stand out among all the recent animated films that aim for photorealism. On top of the unique representation of animals, Flow also stands out in its depiction of natural landscapes. Just as we did with animals, I think it's fair to draw a comparison with Disney here. When it comes to its representation of landscape, the studio is also criticized for its focus on the transformation of individual characters and their emotional arcs, while leaving the larger environment, be it natural or social, as a mere backdrop that doesn't go through any change. Renowned Soviet filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein has made a similar criticism by claiming that Disney ignored the unlimited possibilities for landscape elements to live and pulsate. When it comes to this point, Flow also stands out because it pays a lot of attention to the landscape it features. Not only does the movie make the environment go through significant change, unlike Disney, but in many instances, this change in nature is what influences the transformation of the characters themselves. It creates this dynamic relation between them and their environment, blurring the line between subject and object and background and foreground, something that filmmakers like Eisenstein believe animation has a huge potential for. I believe that Flow lives up to this potential with its world that is in constant environmental change. We see that reflected in the director's technical choices, like the use of moving cameras and long takes without any cuts. He stated that he was inspired by live-action movies and video games in his incorporation of long shots and wide-angle lenses. You don't see conventional coverage with close-ups and wide shots. You see this wide-angle lens following the characters, and this allows the audience to look around themselves and decide what to look at within the frame. This approach to depicting the environment speaks to animation's potential of giving life to every element of the picture. Now, we should be clear that Flow only stands out in contrast to mainstream Western animation when it comes to this point. Outside that, some animators are known to stand out, like the Czech filmmaker Yeung known for movies like Alice and Faust. And of course, there is also the Japanese filmmaker Hayao Miyazaki. Whenever in a new animated movie gives any kind of attention to their depiction of the environment, chances are these movies will definitely be compared to the works of Miyazaki. And Flow is no exception, as many reviewers and film journalists have already made the comparison. Even the director himself does reference Miyazaki as an inspiration in one interview. Of course, the association is evident when we consider the film's immersive environment and nature-focused aesthetics, but Flow is also similar to Miyazaki when it comes to the inclusion of fantastical elements, like this giant whale that doesn't look exactly like a whale. As one Reddit commenter put it, it's more like a tentacle monster leviathan. There are also these magic temple mountain things, and all those statues of cats that might indicate that the extinct human society used to worship them. Anyway, this is just to say that while the movie relates to Miyazaki's filmography in its attention to detail and the sense of realism when it comes to representing nature, it's also similar in its addition of a fantastic, mythical, or spiritual touch to that. I would like to mention that this approach is not new to Zilbalotis, as we can see with his 2019 debut film, Away, which was similarly unique and impressive, as he created the movie completely on his own using Blender. Away also shares similarities with Miyazaki films in the way it features a strong focus on nature and landscapes, as well as an incorporation of surreal and dreamlike sequences similar to the fantastic elements found in Miyazaki films. This rich ecological dimension of Flow, of course, naturally invites associations with real-world environmental issues. It makes sense to refer to climate change since the title of the movie is Flow, and its narrative is built around this major event of a flood that covers much of the world with water. This could easily be compared to sea level rising caused by melting ice caps and glaciers in the real world. There's also the emphasis on other extreme weather events that shape the movie, like the storms taking place near the end. We see the parallels to climate change reflected in the reception of the movie, as it was referred to as an eco-fable, probably due to its perception as an eco-conscious narrative told through the point of view of animals. But as we've seen earlier, Flow is such a unique take on the concept, because fables are known for being highly anthropomorphic. The movie is very interesting in this regard because in its attempt to add an ecological dimension to the fable form, it puts under question the very idea of entirely centering human experience in narratives that are presented through the lenses of animals. This take is refreshing since it brings our attention to other perspectives of creatures that are suffering from the consequences of our actions that they hadn't contributed to in any way. We get a hint at how much this idea shapes the film through one comment by the director about what happens in the world of this story. We're not explaining what happens to the humans and where this flood comes from, because we're experiencing it from the cat's point of view. We don't explain it with words, but we try to leave some clues for the audience to figure it out for themselves. This reaffirms how much the animal's perspective is emphasized in the movie, but that is still not to say that there's absolutely nothing in it that would resonate with humans. Flow has also been compared to a climate change parable, since it very obviously tries to operate as an allegory to get across a moral lesson. From this point of view, that could be an environmental message, a guideline as to how we should act in the face of ecological challenges. Describing the movie as a parable seems more appropriate because it does indeed have a strong religious undertone. The flood can not only be interpreted as an allegory to climate change, but with the representation of animals that survive mainly on a boat, there is an undeniable parallel to the biblical story of Noah's Ark. But of course, the interpretation of the movie does not have to be exclusively one or the other. These are just some of its layers that are deeply interconnected. Environmental narratives themselves are usually heavily associated with religious stories anyway. The very idea of an apocalypse that we tend to see from an environmental perspective can be traced back to religious texts and biblical stories, like Noah's Ark in this case. In eco-critical circles, the religious figure of Noah is viewed as an environmentalist who tries to preserve biodiversity. The flood narrative is also interpreted as a parable about anthropogenic climate change and human responsibility. The story emphasizes the need for collaboration and collective action in the face of disaster, which is very common in environmental narratives too. One interesting thing that the movie did with this parallel is how it used different animals to represent different kinds of reactions to dealing with climate change. These differences in reactions and emotions lie at the heart of the story and shape its very conflict. The entire narrative is structured around the animal's journey trying to figure out how to get their different characteristics to cooperate with one another. One motive that speaks to this idea is the mirrors that appear several times in the movie. The motive is embodied in this one mirror that the animals keep using, especially the lemurs, who keep looking at their images through it. But we also see it in the reflections of the animals in the water. One thing that's for sure is that a shift occurs throughout the movie where the animals start from a point of only looking at their own reflections, and then they end the film by looking at their reflections all together. And this signals a shift in their approach to combating environmental challenges. I have to be clear though that this remains an interpretation. The director highlighted the way this movie also reflects his own experience making indie movies and learning how to go from working alone on his debut Away to collaborating with other creators on Flow. Now, regardless of whether he also intended for this to mirror environmental issues or not, the reading still stands and serves to enrich the movie even further. In the end, all of Flow's unique characteristics definitely make it feel like a breath of fresh air within the broader landscape of contemporary animation. It definitely brings something new to the table and brilliantly makes use of the potential of the medium, but it might also be going even further than that. As far as representations of the natural world and the delivery of environmental messages go, the film can have meaningful impact on its viewers, as centering the animal perspective can get them to engage in ways that human ones would not. As the director of the movie has stated in one interview, we feel more emotionally engaged with animal characters, and we care more about their well-being. If the cat acts like a total bastard, we easily forgive. We wouldn't forgive so easily if it were a human character. The impact of narratives about animals on inspiring action for their protection is well tested and documented. So such claims are not all that speculative. One would imagine that a narrative with this much commitment to centering the animals and presenting more dynamic relations with the natural world would have an even greater impact on viewers' perceptions and potential for action. The fact that Flow managed to win an Oscar for the Best Animated Film revives a lot of hope about the potential of animation to innovate not only on an artistic level but also on a cultural one.